When we started it back in the day, it was done accidentally in the beginning. It was 2.5 hours long.
When IOLs are sutured in,
Yeah,
you don't really know where it's going to center until, pull things tight and then it's done.
we have done in that 5 years. And what's the amount or degree of tilt that we found?
From the 9th annual winter meeting of the IIRSI in beautiful Amritsar, I'm Josh Young. I'm here with my dear friend Ashvin Agarwal. Ashvin, glued IOLs it's really something that you've pioneered, that Amar's pioneered, and has evolved over time. I want to ask you, first of all, how the techniques changed and maybe how the patient population for it's changed. And then I want to get into the weeds a little bit.
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Josh. It's such a wonderful thing seeing you in Amritsar, in our land. And thank you for Rohit and Tushya for, organizing this big event. It's amazing. So, let's get our hands dirty. The glued IOL actually as a procedure, if you look at it, when we started it back in the day, it was done accidentally in the beginning, where when we did it the first time, we didn't realize what was happening. It was 2.5 hours long. And at the end of it, we said, oh my God, this is not going to work. But the patient came back next day and said, wow. And it was a 6-9 after a 2.5 hour surgery of literally going through the grind. But what really stood out was the stability of the intraocular lens. That the lens was rock solid and was not moving. So the effective lens position actually just stayed in one spot. That was the game changer for when glued. There was life before glued IOL, and then there was life after glued IOL. That was what really changed the scenario of not having sutures which keep moving and causing pseudophacodonosis, and not having to go through life where you have erosions of sutures coming through and dangling intraocular lenses inside the eye. More importantly, the life when you had the lens inside the eye was phenomenal. And the patient was just seeing through even a bad situation. So, give you an example of this is putting two trees and a hammock. If you tie that with knots, what happens is it moves. Every time you move your head, the lens kind of shakes a little bit, and that shake, for it to stabilize, it takes 2 or 3 minutes for it to stabilize so that the patient can see. They don't have that time. When I move my head, I want to be able to see what's next, and this is the question that we don't ask a lot of times at the podium, and that's why these interactions become real. And these interactions become where the people actually get that and say, hey, even if I go through this journey of learning curve of, let's say, a month and a half, 45 days of learning, I'm actually able to come out a better winner for my mother, for my grandmother, who might have these situations in the later future, and I'll be able to implant a glued IOL for them.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Interrupt, but
Yes.
I'm enthusiastic, and I want to chime in too. First of all, I've seen you make the point that that when IOLs are sutured in,
Yeah.
you don't really know where it's going to center until
Yes.
you pull things tight and then it's done, right?
Yes.
Whereas I have seen you line things up that you thought were perfect, change your mind, and you're able to adjust
Tighten.
the haptic position in order to recenter the lens. Second of all, if there were only something that attached to the lens in a way that would hold it firmly, and of course there is, those things are called haptics, and you if you're suturing things in, then you're bypassing something that the lens is built for. Of course, one of the challenges is the technique.
Yeah. So, couple of things. Let me simplify this whole thing, right? If you want to get a centered, proper, great IOL position in glued IOL, you just got to get 3 steps absolutely spot on. And they are not anything to do with the intraocular lens. They have nothing to do with the intraocular lens. You've got to get the flaps 180 degrees apart. We've got to get the sclerotomies exactly probably 1 millimeter behind the limbus. And we have to get the Gabor Chariot's tunnel exactly in that angle so that in the angle, in the sense you don't have to go inside the eye. It's just a tunnel. These three things will get you a centered intraocular lens every single time you do it, no matter how much struggle you might have implanting the lens. Because glued IOL overall is a very forgiving procedure. Let's say I kink the haptic while I'm externalizing the haptic in a glued IOL, right? That can happen. That's the most common thing to happen. But the minute I put it into the track, it forgives because the memory of that haptic really comes back. And now it's in alignment with the normal shape of the intraocular lens and the normal shape of the eye. And now it's like Rock of Gibraltar. That's what we want to address. That's what I wanted to address in this talk.
Now, this has been, I mean, really such a revolutionary introduction in ophthalmology that it has spurred some techniques that are offshoots, and Yamani
Yeah.
is the most significant one.
Yes.
It's unfair for me to ask you to compare and to comment on Yamani, but I'm an unfair guy, so I'm going to ask you to do it anyway.
No, I'm happy to answer that because I do feel anything. So we all look at it as, oh, Yamane or glued, Yamane or glued. I think both have their place, number one. Second, if not for Yamane, actually glued IOL also would not have become that popular. Because at the end of the day, Yamane is an easier procedure, and it made the whole segment of intrascleral haptic fixation very popular. What started happening is the rotisserie effect, the kinking of IOL haptics, the tilting of the optic. These issues actually fueled the glued IOL boom again. So it's a give and take of growth of science. In fact, if I just have to over blanket this whole thing, it's actually science that won at the end. Overall, and we have stopped putting in, actually in my last 10 years I have not put a single sutured IOL. I've never placed an AC IOL inside the eye. I don't even know how to place one today if you ask me to do so. So these are, to me, huge leaps and bound advantages to the close to 2-3,000 surgeries that I've done in this line. So that's just me as one surgeon, and you can just extrapolate that with number of people that have probably been doing Yamane or glued. And I think those are huge wins as a science. But I'll give you some comparative notes on how I feel glued IOL compares to Yamane. When you look at glued IOL, one of the biggest points is that you will not have this kinking, tilting of haptics happening. Versus in Yamane, you have a lot of those. In glued IOL, we did a study where we launched a 5-year study of all the glued IOLs that we have done in that 5 years, and what's the amount or degree of tilt that we found? It was close to 1 to 2 degrees of tilt, versus if you just compare an in the bag is also 1 to 2 degrees of tilt. In fact, if you put it in the sulcus, you have 5 degrees of tilt of the intraocular length. So these are just comparative notes. So one of the biggest thing is tilt post-operatively. Second aspect over here is, as you said, you can always, if you don't get the centration right, you can always release some of the haptic on one side and increase it on the other side. So what this means is it's very forgiving in a way. Even after I've done the whole procedure, I can still go wrong in a Yamane. You can't now flange it and then,
Right.
you have to cut the flange in Yamane and then re-flange it again, which shortens the length of the haptic.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge in my view when I look at it overall. The third aspect over here is I can't do Yamane in a really complex procedure. Like if I have a nucleus piece inside the eye, I would have to actually first explant that nucleus piece and then place a Yamane. In glued IOL, I don't have to do that because all I need in the glued IOL is the central 2 millimeters for visualizing the haptic when I am externalizing it. Versus in Yamane, I need to have a very clear peripheral view of the cornea for me to thread the haptic inside the needle. So these challenges really make it extremely difficult for even an expert surgeon like me to, I'm not calling myself expert, but you know what I
You're
mean.
an expert, yeah.
But the idea is that even for a person like me, it's really challenging to do that in a complex case where I have a dropped nucleus or a dropped IOL. It's not easy for me to do. Third aspect, in glued IOL, I'm making flaps and a sclerotomy. These are my only pivot points that I need. Versus in Yamane, I have to make a valve and a angled entry inside the eye.
So that there's more risk of haptic torsion?
There's a risk of haptic torsion. There's a risk of misalignment, asymmetry. So if I have a different angle on one side and a different angle on the other side, I would not get a centered IOL and I would not get a properly tilted IOL. So those are some issues I cannot even predict. How do I predict this? They made instruments to get the angle right, but nobody uses them. And it's not advisable to use them because it's so challenging to hold that in one place and then do it, that they find it easier to just use the needle.
From the perspective of a disinterested party, from my standpoint, it's wonderful that there are these two techniques that are addressing the same issue, because it winds up being this conversation
Yes.
between the two, and each one informs the
Other.
Yeah. So this is wonderful, wonderful stuff. I applaud you not only for innovation, but for your passion in teaching this. And most of all, I applaud you for your patience and generosity of your time with me today. Ashvin, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Josh.